Good evening. This is my first full day of isolation today, and my flat has never looked quite so clean because I've been bored out of my head, and it's now looking like I don't even live here. I don't know who lives here now, some weird clean freak. So well, I am going to try and give you as much entertainment and content as I possibly can over the next 2 weeks or so, however long this thing takes. So there is very little in the way of entertainment news or comic news, as you can imagine. So what I did today is I put out on our social media a bit of a shout out for people to send in questions, and the questions that I've asked them to send in were about anything. Ask me anything, it doesn't really matter whether you wanted to talk about comics or TV or film or anything else. And as as you can imagine, some of the questions, well, should we just get into them? And we'll start off with some of the serious ones and then we'll get on to the others. Now, Andrew Holder on Facebook, one of our customers, he has said, I presume the publication of all new US comics is now suspended. What have you been told to expect in the future, delivery-wise? Well, this is a good question because obviously all of the comic shops in this country are shut. I don't know about the comic shops in the US, but I would imagine that they're on lockdown as well. Diamond, the publisher of nearly every distributor, I should say, of all of the comics, both this side and in the States, have stated that comic deliveries as of now are stopped, and they're stopped for the foreseeable future. It's obviously Wednesday today, so we should have had a new comic delivery ready to go out on the shelves today, had things been normal, but obviously they're not. So all they can say is that everything is stopped indefinitely. So it's a bit of a relief for someone who runs a shop because, as a lot of you know, the comic industry works 2 months in advance. So all of our orders are already made for 2 months' time. And so there was a fear that we would close and still have to be paying for comics that are coming for 2 months. So luckily, everybody's in the same boat. So they've seen sense and have paused all comic deliveries. How it looks when it comes back is pretty much anybody's guess, whether there will be a reduced release schedule and stuff just gets put back and spread out over the time. Who knows? I mean, otherwise there's going to be a lot of stuff all coming in a very short space of time, which is going to be unmanageable, not only for the distributor, for the sellers, but also for you guys. You know, you're not going to be able to afford to buy hundreds and hundreds of comics all in one go. So some common sense will need to prevail. But this is the comic industry, and when has common sense ever played any part in that whatsoever? So there you go, Andrew. I don't know. Basically, here's the answer to that one. So that was a good start. Then I've got a question from Harley Snowden on Twitter. And his question was, what's your dream cast for the XMen when they arrive in the MCU? Now, I'm presuming he means dream, as opposed to Dreamcast, but, you know, you can tell he's a gamer, eh? To be honest, I don't know. I guess it would be nice to see some of the original cast, perhaps, but I know they're all getting on a bit now. Wolverine will have to be recast. Some of the people they've said that they're putting forward for Wolverine are definitely the wrong size. You know, Wolverine's a short ass, right? So you can't cast Henry Cavill, for example, who's one that I've heard rumoured. So because he's a big man, isn't he? I've never stood next to him, but as far as I can tell, he looks kind of big. But then I guess they used to make Arnie look quite tall in films, didn't they? So who knows? I would like I think a way of introducing them would be AVX. I think that would be a great storyline with which to bring them in. Obviously, there's a whole new X-Men run running at the moment in comics, so there's so much that you could do to bring them in. And then, of course, you could do Civil War 2 eventually, you know, and then you've got, because all of them are missing from Civil War, obviously. And who knows, you know, AVX, I think, would be a really good way of starting it off, and certainly a big event, isn't it? So, Holly also asked, if I could choose the story for the next Star Wars solo film or series, what character would you like to see be the focus? Now, I presume he means individual rather than Han Solo when he says solo. So, who would I like to see? To be honest, I think they could go far worse than doing something around Mara Jade. Now, for those of you who are only know Star Wars through maybe some of the comics or some of the or for the movies, you won't really be familiar with Mara Jade. She was the hand of the Emperor, and then she becomes, and she's force sensitive and a bit of a badass, and her and Luke have got a little kind of on-off love-hate relationship thing that goes on in some of the extended universe, in some of the books that were then taken out from being canon. Admiral Thrawn is another one. You know, I know he's come into Rebels now, but what a fantastic bad guy he is, and Timothy Zahn did amazing creating that character. It's good to see him in Rebels. You know, Ahsoka apparently is going to be in the next Mandalorian, so perhaps a spin-off series from there would be a good one as well. And of course, you know, we all want to see a Darth Maul series, film, you know, something along the lines of a Darth Maul series would be great. So there's so much canon, and I think that there's almost a temptation to leave that behind now as they start to work on like the Old Republic stuff and start from scratch. But I don't know, I'm still, you could leave the Skywalker saga completely alone like they have done in Mandalorian, and still have that familiar looking ships and locations and stormtroopers and everything else. So it's an interesting time for Star Wars, I think. Incidentally, I watched Rise of Skywalker again the other day, and yeah, it's full of flaws, but I still absolutely love it, and it gives you that. It gives me the feeling that I want from a Star Wars movie, which is made me feel like a kid, and even watching it again made me feel like a kid. So I love it, and I don't care if you didn't, really. So next, Christian Vincent of the Talking Smack podcast, of which I think we have a few questions coming from the people on the Talking Smack podcast, so thanks, has asked me, why doesn't Iron Man rust? Well, mainly because it's not made out of iron, I guess, and that's it, really. Is he galvanised? Who knows? Who knows? I mean, maybe the words Iron Man are a little bit disingenuous. Who knows? But he doesn't rust, as far as we know. I mean, there's been so many different marks, you know, marks of Iron Man costume. It could be that he has to replace them on a regular basis because the other ones have just turned into shit where they've rusted. I'm just saying. I don't know for definite that they don't rust. It could be made out of iron. I suggest it's probably not. But then it's not really real, so who knows? So thanks, Christian. You strange man you are. Darren Penfold says, the expansion into video games and consoles was a surprise. I presume he's talking about my Gobsmack Comics here. But a welcome one. And how has that been going in the short time between its introduction and this pandemic? Well, it's been going well. And actually, it took a little while to take off. obviously there's always an adjustment period when you start a new product range in your store. Having video games and consoles and stuff, I think, adds a new dimension to what we do, and it ties in with everything. You know, my store isn't massive, but we try to cater for pretty much all tastes in pop culture. So, and we'll try something. If it doesn't work, we try something else, and that's kind of the way it is. But as far as I'm concerned, every day is just practice for the next one. So it has been going well. We sold out completely of Animal Crossing. We've sold out of Switches at the moment, which I guess doesn't really matter because there's not going to be anyone coming in the shop for a while. And I'm pleased that you like the shop. I mean, he goes on to say, half the fun of visiting Gobsmack Comics was looking around at all its wonders. I presume he's not talking about me on that one. I'm certain I'll be doing the same when the day comes and the shop is open again. That day is inevitable. Now, no matter where we are at the moment, Gobsmack Comics will be coming back. Unless this goes on for a year, say. We are in a decent enough position to know that we'll be coming back. And we have been hugely lucky, humbled and grateful to have such a wonderful customer base. You've all been so amazing, and I can't thank you enough. And long may it continue. And I'm just here to kind of make your lives more interesting, I guess. You know, I mean, without Gobsmack at the moment, there'd be no new video games shop in town, you know, and there's no comics and no books, and I'm here. So if you've got any idea, you know, this is not a dictatorship. I've never run my business like that. I'm welcome to new ideas and anything, and that goes for what we talk about on our podcast, what I do on these videos, and what we stock in the shop. You know, we're willing to try anything. Within reason, you know, sex toys, maybe not. Maybe not. But just, you know, if there's something that you want us to get in, we can pretty much order anything. So it will be, and I don't want this to sound like a begging kind of, like a begging sentence, but it's going to be difficult. And we are going to need your support when we come back. But the most important thing is that we're all fit and healthy, and we get through this, what is essentially just the most crazy time that any of us have ever lived through. So that's the most important thing. And interestingly, I woke up this morning at 9:30, and that is the longest lie-in I've had in absolutely ages. And over the last few weeks, especially as this whole thing developed, I have been really stressing out and worried about my business, as you can imagine. And now it's out of my hands completely. It's completely out of my control. There's almost a sense of calm. And the sun was out today, and I was sitting outside, and I'm thinking, well, the apocalypse isn't as bad as I was expecting it to be. I don't mean to make light of it. Obviously, there's a lot of people going through a terrible time. And that's just my own personal experience so far. So let's get on. Now, a serious question comes from Stuart Fulbrook, again, of our podcast infamy. Should you eat mayo on a bacon sandwich? Now, this refers, in case you don't listen to the podcast, which is not okay, because you need to get on there. You can find it at Talking Smack. This refers to a time when we went to a convention, and Sean, also of our podcast, was there, and had some very strange stains down the front of his tracksuit bottoms. and he was trying to convince us that it was mayonnaise that had fallen out of a bacon sandwich. At which point, we questioned whether you should ever have mayo on a bacon sandwich. And of course, the answer is yes, if you're a freak. If you're not a freak, then of course the answer is no. I mean, who puts mayo on a bacon sandwich? Mayo should not be on anything, as far as I'm concerned. Mayo is gross. And if you like mayo, you're weird. Just my opinion. So, Stu, no, the answer is no. You know the answer is no. Everybody knows the answer is no. There should be no mayo on a bacon sandwich. Now, Ian Tomlinson follows that up with serious question time. Red or brown sauce on your bacon sandwich? Now, Ian, I think that brown sauce is just gross. And I like ketchup, but actually in my bacon sandwich, I like to have loads of butter and nothing else. So I have bread, lots of butter and bacon, and that is it. I'm kind of like I would like to call myself a purist. Other people might think I'm weird. But as it stands, no, I have neither. But if I had to choose, then ketchup all the way, brown sauce, no thank you. Simon Carter asks, for the followers who are missing the joy of Christmas, please explain again how decades work. Now, again, this is another callback to our Christmas podcast, where we, actually, it was a look back over the decade. Now, I asked the people who were on the podcast to give us their top 10 TV shows of the last decade. Now, there was some conjecture as to how a decade works. I said, of the last decade. Now, some people chose to think that would include the year before the start of the decade. And we had a long discussion about it, and I was trying to explain that a decade starts at 0 and goes through to 10. Hence the dec part of it. But they were saying that it started in 2009 because that was 10 years rather than starting at 2010 to 2020, because when we were recording it, essentially we were still in 2019, albeit by about 10 days. They were trying to convince me that they should be allowed to have TV shows that started in 2009, that actually the bulk of the work was in 2010. I wasn't having any of it. It's my podcast. It was tough shit. So that's how a decade works. It starts, so for example, this year, 2020, not last year, 2019, 2020, and we'll go to 2030. Yes. With the final day being the last day of 2029. So I hope that's cleared it up. So when we get to the last day of 2029, and I do the look back at the decade, it won't include last year. Just so you know. Next, this one comes from Instagram, and this one is from Stephen Otters, and I presume that's his surname, not an adjective. What will you be streaming on Disney Plus first? There's a simple answer to that. Nothing. I'm not getting Disney Plus. I have no interest in it whatsoever. Mandalorian I've already seen, because obviously Stuart and I flew over to America to watch the entire series so we could talk about it on our podcast. But apart from that, I'm not going to get Disney Plus. Just because everything that I want to see that will be on there, I can see in other places. So all of the films, pretty much already own most of them anyway. That might be a bit of a boring answer, but I guess if you were to ask me, Mandalorian, because I've already seen it, so that would be the first thing I streamed. So we've got a few more, and then we'll call it a day. So Chris Bullock asks me, why don't DC Comics respond to social media messages? Asked them numerous times if they're ever going to release a Superman Blue graphic novel, Volume 2, never had a response. Anyway, next one. No, seriously, it's because you're insignificant, mate. Unfortunately, that's my answer. We are just specks of dirt underneath a cold, indifferent sun. And they don't care. They don't care about us. If you've contacted them on social media and they're still ignoring you, that must be pretty harsh, dude. And I can only feel your pain and empathise. DC and Marvel, they've never been good at communicating. They don't even communicate to us retailers very often. We ask them questions, they don't answer. So it's not just you, mate. Will there ever be a Superman Blue graphic novel number 2? Don't know. You should ask DC, see what they say. 2 more. So, Daniel James asks what my 5 top comics are. Now, this is difficult because I tried to think quickly, because I only got these questions in a little while ago, what my 5 top series were of all time. And I had to drop a few things in and out, excuse me, as I thought about it. So this is what I've come up with, and I don't think they're going to be in any particular order. So Huck from Image Comics by Mark Millar is one of my favourite series of all time, and I'm hoping Mark Millar will do a second series of Huck at some point in the future. Saga, because it's amazing. Again, from Image Comics. If you haven't read Saga, it's fantastic. It's on a lot of volumes now, and it's still going, so please check that out. Killing Joke, because it's the Killing Joke. One of the best Batman stories, I think, of all time. Then I've gone for Jeff Steinberg, Champion of Earth, because it's one of the books that actually genuinely made me laugh out loud consistently, and it's little known, and it should be much wider known. If we ever open up the shop again and you're interested in checking that one out, it's actually, I think all of these are actually in stock. So if you want to check any of these out to see whether I'm talking crap or whether actually I kind of sometimes know what I'm talking about, which is unlikely, but you know. And finally, V for Vendetta, which is, I think, one of the greatest pieces of comic literature of all time. Especially while we're on a lockdown from the government, which is obviously in our own interests. So I'm not belittling that, but V for Vendetta is very topical as it stands. So again, check that one out if you haven't read it. I mean, if you haven't read it, then you need to read that one. That is an imperative. It's one of the standout books of all time. So, and finally, because I won't keep you for much longer, Ben Robbins says, who would win a fight between the McDonald's clown, which I presume he means Ronald McDonald, or the Burger King King? Now that is a very good question, because I think the Burger King King's got a bit of beef to him, right? So I can imagine him doing kind of a few pole drivers and, you know, some spears. But I think you look at Ronald McDonald, and you look at that clown, and there's something shifty about him. You know, I think that the King would be up giving it like this, and Ronald would have like a shiv under his wig. You know what I mean? Because he's a shifty fucker, right? So I think it's a tough one. In a fair fight, I think the Burger King King's going to win all day long, because he's a bit beefier, and you know, although you know, the clown's got long feet, right? So if he's got long feet, he's got good kick reach. So there is that. And maybe if you punched him, he would fall backwards but then spring back up because of his feet. Yeah, who knows? It's a tricky one. But then the King, you know, they both have ridiculously punchable faces, right? So they could just stand there battering each other in the face. I mean, is the Whopper better than the Quarter Pounder? This is the thing, you know. I mean, if you were to chuck one of them at each other, which one would do the most damage? I'd hasten to think that probably neither of them would do that much damage because they're burgers. Now, I think I'm going to go with Ronald McDonald winning the fight, because I just can't get past the fact that I think he would kind of fight dirty. You know what I mean? It's like, yeah, I think he'd be a dirty fighter, mainly because he's just a shifty so-and-so, you know. And plus, he's had a lot of practice with the Hamburglar. You know, so he's done a fair bit of sparring in his time, so he knows how to handle the Hamburglar. And I think the Hamburglar and the King, well, I mean, you've never seen those two in the same place at the same time, have you? So the Hamburglar and the King could essentially be the same person. But then does that give the King an advantage? Because if that gives the King an advantage, because he then knows Ronald McDonald's tactics, because he's fought with him whilst dressed as the Hamburglar. This is a tough one. And out of all these questions, this is not the one I was thinking that I was going to get stuck on. I reckon I'm going to stick with my original answer, and I think I'm going to stay with Ronald McDonald. I think the clown wins because he's a shifty git, and that's all there is to it. So, on that wondrous note, I think I'll call it an evening. Now, I hope you've enjoyed this. It could have been a car crash, who knows? Thank you for your questions. I'll probably do this again if you thought it was any good. So leave me a message in the comments, whether it's on Facebook or YouTube or wherever you see this. Leave me a message if you thought it was all right. If you didn't, leave me a message anyway, because I'm kind of lonely. I'm on my own, so anything, slag me off, I don't care. Just some sort of human interaction is always welcome. And seriously, I hope you're all safe and well. I hope you're all doing the right things. And I hope to see you all really soon. Thanks a lot. See you later.